Hi, you are watching Sightsin Plus and this is Romesh Srivastava. Please do subscribe the channel for the HR news, for HR updates and conversation with the top-notch CHRs. Today, I'll start the discussion with a question. Do you think you're paid fairly? I think most of the answers may be no. Maybe you're being paid fairly, but you don't perceive this. Then, what are the reasons? Yeah, you're right. We are going to talk about the pay equity today. And to discuss in detail and to understand better, we have two senior CNB experts with us. Let me introduce Mr. Madhur Mehta. He is Senior Director, Global Compensation at Boston Consulting Group, and Mr. Navneet Mukund is a Project Director, HR Consulting at Mercer. So, Madhur, if I come to you first, recently Gartner has issued a survey, and according to this survey, only 32% of employees they believe that they are being paid fairly, and 34% of employees they believe that their pay is equitable. But another interesting data is that the focus of 74% of the senior leaders that is on the pay equity. So this little contrast is here. So if 34% of the senior leaders keeping the focus on pay equity, then why only 32% of employees they believe that they are being paid fairly? So this is also pointed out by the Gartner that this is because of a trust issue, because the employees don't trust on the employers. That's why this is the figure. So my question is that what is your comment on this survey, and how the organization can win the trust of their employees?
I am not surprised with what Gartner has reported. And there are a number of factors that play into that. The first and foremost, definitely there is a set of employees that are not being paid fairly. So let's get that out of off our back. There are people who do not get paid fairly. Then there is this entire thing around pay transparency, which I think we will discuss in detail today. And it's really not about what they are paid. I think it's the lack of transparency around how do we determine what they are paid, and do we share that criteria? Do we share the process with them? Because when we do not, employees do not trust the result. And that is what is captured in these surveys, in these reports. So I'm not surprised. So it's a mix of various factors. Definitely there is pay inequity, there can be pay inequality, and then there is the lack of trust in the decision-making process, pointing to the entire phenomena around pay transparency. So long story short, totally agree with what we are hearing. The numbers may change from one survey vendor to the other, but I think the broad theme definitely continues.
Absolutely. So, Navneet, before we go little deeper into the pay transparency part, I would like to share a case with you. Recently, the TCS has announced that they are working to double the salaries of their employees. Double means they are working on the pay disparity. What happened actually during the Great Resignation time, or you can say during the pandemic time, many companies have hired the new employees on the 100% hike, 150% hike, more than this. So what happened? The employees, those who remained loyal that time, they did not quit the organization. They are feeling that their compensation is not at par to the newly hired people or those who quit the organization that time. So the company is working to deal with this kind of the pay disparity part. So how do you see that companies work on this pay disparity, and how the companies address this problem?
It was bound to happen. TCS, being part of, IT industry, it has turned out to be one of the largest employers in India, right? In the last, say, 10, 15, 20 years. So what they do has a ramification on the entire pay level, definitely of that industry. And if that industry is the largest employer, then of course, overall, the perception of pay equity, pay transparency, or pay levels, will definitely have a bearing on the decisions that these large employers take. So I agree that during the pandemic, maybe the realization to these companies were starker, and it's not a knee-jerk reaction that they are doing it. In fact, I read a bit more about their program. on of course, the available media. It's called Elevate. It's more like an upskill program. And only if you compete and successfully compete, which could be 10 to 15% of all the employees who enroll for that program, then basically, you are given that correction, right? Whether it will move the needle, of course, we can discuss in the later part of our discussion today. If only 10% of employees are getting corrected, looking at what happened during Great Resignation, we will see, right? Other employers have to follow suit, and then maybe only, even after that, only one industry will be impacted, Ramesh, and not all the industries, because we are just still talking about an example from ITES industry, right? Yeah, but it definitely will have an impact, will have a bearing. Something is better than nothing. Regarding the survey itself, just one comment before we delve into the discussion. I completely agree with what Madhur said, that it definitely has to be there. It seems right that this kind of perception employees have. And I don't know, Gartner is a US based company, whether this survey was specific to India, Asia, or US. If the perception is skewed because of the respondents from the US, and if there were more respondents from the US, if you double click on the survey itself, I don't know that, I'm just picking it up, then the perception in India will be starker. Instead of 68%, it could be 70s or 80s even, right? So these surveys are important. But again, any survey related to compensation, you have to take with a pinch of salt. So in companies that I worked, in companies that Madhur may have worked, the score on people survey, HR survey, this will always be the bottom 5, positive scores on compensation, how you perceive you're compensated. People feel that, okay, somebody will take an action based on the results of these surveys. And, they do not often respond what they feel. But yeah, perception is always there. And, like Madhur also said, it is more to do with the education and communication and what they feel and how their pay is decided. That is very important. So I'll come to that more as we proceed in the discussion. But if you ask me that what is the single largest factor in this kind of a skewed perception of employees, even if you take the factor of industry aside, and you assume for a moment in this discussion that similar results will come if you have to roll out this survey in manufacturing, banking, or any other sector, and assuming that it will be similar results, agnostic of the geography or industry, the single largest factor why employees may feel that is because of communication and education. They do not know how their pay is fixed, and that is a holy grail, if you ask me. We'll come to that in the discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. Perception matters. But second comes that the pay transparency. When you create a position and share a JD in a market, generally people write the negotiable. Salary is negotiable. Salary is best in the industry. Generally, they don't write the range that is between 10 to 12 lakhs or 20 to 25 lakhs. So here the confusion starts when you find the candidates suitable up to the certain rounds of interview. And when you start the negotiation, salary negotiation, maybe sometime you reach to agreement, and sometime there is a heated conversation as well, and sometime you may also lose the candidate because we don't have any law here in India that maintains the pay transparency. But we can have the policies, we can have the practices. So how the organization can have the complete pay transparency in India?
It will have to be a journey. In more developed countries, especially US and some of the other countries in EU, this is starting to pick up. There are states where there are legislations that you have to, mention the compensation range against an open requisition, right? So not all the states, but some states have started to enact such laws. And I would say that industry leading companies, if they have global presence, in US or across the world. They are the first companies which should try to take a leaf out of this legislation and not restrict this kind of transparency or visibility only in the states or countries which are legislating. So, for example, let's take a large company, TCS is a large company. Let's take an IBM or an Accenture. I'm still sticking to the same industry. If you have presence across US, Europe, Asia, India, why not take a leaf, out of those legislations and try to replicate some of that, in India? I think largely, Ramesh, it has also to do with, the cost structures of the company, misplaced perception that managers and employees are not educated or mature in inverted commas to take it in the right spirit, right? So most of the companies feel that if they become more transparent in pay, employees will create a lot of, hue and cry or start to kind of demand for that salary, may lead to, strikes or, formation of unions and things like that. I think some of those concerns, are not, fully out of place. But yeah, I think, sometimes we do not stress test this empirically. Let's start with a pocket of employees. Let's say if you have a large business unit, you can start with that business unit, some geographies. Whether or not a legislation is there or not, right? That kind of feedback or reaction from the employees in the US can still be there, right? I mean, they will not start reacting only because legislation is there. Not everybody will be aware that this is a new legislation, right? So employees should be more transparent. If they think that they cannot be drastic about it, they can, take baby steps, start with a BU, a few countries, see the reaction, see if that leads to any, fallout of employees demanding more. And why will employees demand more? If you go back to my first, assessment of why employees feel that primarily because they're not educated. And employees become managers, so managers are not educated. It's not that suddenly when you become a manager and there's a new manager program and 1 day, 1.5 days, 2 days, and you completely acclimatize to understanding pay, right? Pay is not even understood by reward managers properly, right? You do some stints in rewards. So I'm coming to something which is very close to my heart. And then you, because of the scarcity of talent, and supply and demand factors, you get roles and you progress and you become leaders in your field. Sometimes you don't understand pay well, right? So how will you educate the managers? How will you educate the leaders? And then further they will educate the employees, right? Sometimes, and the last point, I don't want to drag this, when a reward manager is taking a feedback about transparency and education and more visibility to employees or managers, the reaction from business is very, very half-baked, ill-informed, not well researched, not well surveyed, often thinking about themselves, and very small, maybe number of employees who directly report into them. So I get into a boardroom. I ask 5 people that should we start publishing pay ranges to managers at least, right? And reaction may be that no, we are not ready yet. We are not mature yet. But why? I mean, that reaction is coming from somebody who's not tested this, right? So and then of course, unless business has a positive feedback about a step, people in the industry, people in the function fraternity, they cannot do much about it, right? Because we have to go by what business wants. So it starts from there. It starts from education. Employees become managers, they become business leaders and CEO later. But on pay, they are not educated. It's taken very lightly, and that's why they feel that their maturity is not there.
And Madhur, what do you feel about the complete pay transparency in India? And if you can also share what are the pros and cons of this pay transparency?
The various aspects around it. When it comes to laws do nothing but, ask for disclosures. Laws will not change your philosophy, right? So all the laws about, what's happening in the US, what's happening in EU, they're mere, disclosure requirements. Some of those laws are now being modified to actually ask for action plans around, pay equity. It may be specific to gender, or it may be specific to race or other ethnicities, but laws only kind of ask you to comply. The larger philosophy is, stems from how you want to operate comp or reward within your organization. I think India is at a very nascent stage. So coming back to your example, Ramesh, around publishing, comp ranges rather than saying negotiable or best in class, right? I think even now, and it's not incorrect, compensation is seen as a competitive advantage, right? And you do not just lay out your competitive advantage. That's the mindset. You just do not share it with all and sundry. So that's where the laws in some of these countries where the pay gap was increasing, in the diverse groups that they employ, force them to do something. It's not that these acts around pay equity and all have not been there. They've been there, for almost 5 to 7 decades, if not, even older. But bottom line is, those were ineffective. So they had to tighten the noose around the laws and force the organizations to first comply, and then while complying, it was driving certain behavior that would ensure that you're taking measures around pay transparency. Now, in India, since you use the word complete pay transparency, I don't, I think that's a very big statement to make. Complete pay transparency, like Navneet said, often the roadblock or the hurdles come from the very top. And as I said, the competitive advantage of a top organization that pays top bucks to just lay out their salaries externally may be a big shocker for them. Whether it's the right or wrong thing to do, we can debate another day. But when it comes to advantages and disadvantages, there was a study done recently, because the US started, mandating some states to publish ranges, like Navneet said, previously, the number of applications that each job that had published ranges got increased by 46 to 50%. So since the ranges were there were more applications, right? So that was the biggest tangible advantage of having ranges published. And you were also kind of narrowing down the pool of candidates that were applying to a much better set. So just imagine you're having more applications and you're having better applications. So that was a win-win. So first and foremost advantage was that. Second, we initially spoke about why the Gartner study pointed out, the bleak results that it did, because there was no trust. With one of the advantages of pay transparency or publishing things like ranges or communicating the impact or the approach towards pay transparency or comp determination in your organization is that you build trust, right? Or employees will then feel that, yes, there is a solid decision-making process that the organization undertakes to determine my pay. And my pay is essential to me. Because I've been comparing or I've been thinking of everyone else's pay, but now I know how my pay is being determined. So pay transparency has these two very solid, tangible advantages. When it comes to certain disadvantages, as I said, the first thing is once you lay out what you pay broadly, even if it, you're not, I'm not saying, you report what each individual is being paid. I don't think that will happen in the near future. But even if you, publish pay levels, you kind of, as I said, run the risk of that being, shared across different social media platforms, across groups that you would not want this to be seen. The second thing is, now when I know that there is someone who's being paid higher than me, my morale may drop, right? So it is a double-edged sword sometimes. Thirdly, and to the point we were making about TCS, a lot of people, a new talent over the last few years have come at higher pay in general. So when you start publishing pay levels, broadly or average pay, then the existing talent may feel hard done by, right? They may feel that, I've given a lot more time to this organization, but I'm still languishing when it comes to the pay level. So you have to manage it very carefully. You need to know what is the level of transparency that works in your culture. And what is the level of transparency that you would want to aspire for? It is a journey. You can't just turn around tomorrow and say, I'm going to publish everyone's pay. It's a recipe for disaster. These changes do not happen overnight. There is a journey that you go on, and that's when you think, what level of information, how much should I infuse so that I'm actually moving towards that goal of achieving pay transparency, and how does that culminate into things like people service scores, when it comes to compensation or reward or trust in my leadership to communicate strategic decisions around my well-being and my pay. So that's my take on this, Ramesh, on the advantages and disadvantages.
Yeah, very rightly pointed out, Madhu. And how, Navneet, we can take the first step towards the pay transparency policy here. Quickly, if you can come in 1 minute.
Yeah, so very quickly, we should start to be more transparent. We should start to educate the managers more. It requires a concerted effort. It requires a well-structured program and, of course, necessary staffing. You should have more reward managers training the HRBPs in a train-the-trainer program, and then further HRBPs training their managers and employees and recruiters, right? We have to train them as well. If companies have a policy that we will not hire anybody below the minimum of the range, right? You do not have to publish the minimum and maximum of the range for every acquisition. You can also publish, a ballpark minimum and median, right? This stinginess that people who are much lower than median or much lower than minimum may end up getting 100% high. So be it, right? Because then how you shortlist range is not only based on position and, of course, later in your employment performance, but also many other things like person, pedigree, which institute you are from. These things play a lot more role in India geography than in other geographies, where somebody is from IT, he can get 5 times the starting salary for somebody who's from a tier 2 or tier 3 college, right? And people are aware of that. And people are aware that if that is the disparity at the start of their career, that disparity will continue.
I think we had a learning discussion today on pay equity. And thank you, Madhu and Navneet, for joining the conversation and sharing your wonderful thoughts.